Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. So I think we're going to have to do this case in two parts, but I'll make sure that they get out pretty close to each other, and the two parts should be adequate enough to cover everything, although this case is extensive. Has a lot of far-reaching consequences and victims. On February 2nd, 2024, a physically healthy 12-year-old boy was transported from his home in New York to the Trails Carolina Wilderness Therapy Camp in Transylvania County, North Carolina. The boy was assigned to a cabin with 4 other clients, and that evening there were 4 staff members present, all of whom would have been responsible for the safety and well-being of the campers. At 7:45 a.m. the next morning on February 3rd, a staff member from the camp called local law enforcement and reported that they had found the 12-year-old boy unresponsive. And when law enforcement arrived, the child was pronounced deceased. An investigation began, which included an autopsy, and 6 months later it was revealed that the boy's cause of death was asphyxia due to smothering. Now, we have a lot to talk about today, but before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video. I needed some extra oomph for recording today's video because I've been feeling a little under the weather, a little foggy-headed, and I wanted the right energy when I sat down to talk to you today. So even though I am the only one in this recording booth here, even though no one can smell me, I spritzed on a new fragrance I've been loving, which gives me such refreshing and energized vibes. And I never would have found it if not for the sponsor of today's video, Scentbird. Now, the fragrance I'm referring to is called Amazon Rainforest by Sanctuary, and it has all of the citrus notes that I'm usually drawn to in a scent, but it also has geranium, which gives it this spiciness, and black pepper that adds a little warmth and woodsiness, and get this, rainwater. It's made with rainwater. It's probably one of the best scents I have ever worn. And like I said, I never would have tried it if not for Scentbird. Scentbird is a monthly subscription service that gives you the ability to choose from a diverse selection of fragrances from popular brands like Prada and Versace, but also from more niche labels like Parfums de Marly and Roja. You are going to get a 30-day supply of each fragrance, which is more than enough time to fully experience the scent and maybe even find your new signature fragrance. I have way too many partially used bottles of perfume sitting in my bathroom because I liked how they smelled in the store, but once I got home and started using them regularly, I realized there was something about my body chemistry that combined with the scent in a way that I really wasn't a fan of. But Scentbird's going to save you all that stress and money because it's incredibly convenient and affordable to try as many scents as you want without committing to a full-sized bottle of fragrance until you're sure that it's true love. Your first month is going to cost you only $8, and then after that it's less than $17 a month, and this makes Scentbird perfect for fragrance lovers and novices alike. Scentbird also has a quiz you can take which encourages you to experiment with fragrances and offers personalized suggestions based on your preferences, and because of that quiz, I found another scent I love that I never would have even thought to try before. Actually, 2 fragrances. Let me just say that this last month with Scentbird was a highly successful month. Wave Child by Room 1015 is the literal perfect summer scent. It's fresh and light and warm with notes of orange, mandarin, watermelon, coconut, and cocoa. And let me tell you, my ADHD brain loves everything about this fragrance, and I can feel my brain buzzing and crackling in the best ways whenever I smell it. Actually, I do keep it on my desk so I can randomly spray it when I'm feeling a bit distracted and disconnected. And then we have Transcend by Fluid. And I cannot tell you what memory this fragrance elicits, but it comes from a very early childhood memory and obviously a very happy time from my early childhood. This scent is kind of like fruity, kind of floral. There's some freesia in there and some pineapple leaf and dragon fruit, but also some sea salt and coastal cedar. So where Wave Child is the sunny beaches of Miami, Transcend is the rocky New England coast with all of its majesty, gray skies, and magic. When I smell it, I'm wrapped in a cozy, like cable knit sweater and a warm hug, and I love it. For me, the best part is how cute and small the vials in the packaging are, which make these fragrances a breeze to travel with. I don't use a big purse, I just have a tiny crossbody bag, and these vials fit easily in there along with fitting into my gym bag, along with my carry-on in the airport, and unlike full-size bottles of perfume, they easily get through TSA. And this means you can travel with your favorite scent no matter where you go. There have been new fragrances that I've tried through Scentbird that I've gone on to purchase full-size bottles of, but mainly I just enjoy trying and falling in in love with new scents every month, and then having a wide range of fragrances that I know I like and that I know smell good on me, and they're available to me to rotate through based on what I'm doing, how I'm feeling, or the vibe I want to give off. That's a lot of fun, and it makes wearing scents a lot more interesting, individualized, and creative than just spraying on the same one every day. And you too can join me on this fragrance journey, because if you're interested in trying Scentbird, all you have to do is scan the QR code that's on the screen right now or use the link below in the description box. And with my coupon code 55Harlowe, you're going to get 55% off at Scentbird. Plus, you'll get free delivery right to your door and a free case to display all your new and fun scents. You get the product for half of the price. That's just $8, which is an absolute steal. Once again, scan the QR code or click the link in the description box to get 55% off at Scentbird. And thank you so much to Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. Let's dive in. So in cases like this where there's so much information and so many far-reaching consequences, it's always hard to know where to start because we want to have a deep and broad understanding of all the context. South Carolina is located on Winding Gap Road in Lake Toxaway, North Carolina, and it's part of what is known as the controversial troubled teen industry, which is a network of residential programs, therapeutic boarding schools, wilderness therapy camps, and boot camps designed to reform and rehabilitate adolescents who are struggling with behavioral, emotional, or psychological issues. Often marketed as a last resort for desperate parents, these programs promise to provide structure, discipline, and therapy to help troubled teens get back on track. Many of these facilities operate with a military-style discipline, emphasizing strict routines, rigorous physical activity, and harsh consequences for misbehavior. Wilderness therapy programs like Trails Carolina often take juveniles into remote, rugged environments where they must learn survival skills and endure physical challenges, theoretically, to build resilience and self-reliance. However, the troubled teen industry has come under significant scrutiny and criticism over the years. Numerous reports of abuse, neglect, and mistreatment have surfaced, with former participants recounting experiences of physical and emotional abuse, inadequate medical care, and lack of proper educational support. Critics have argued that many of these programs operate with minimal oversight and regulation, leading to environments where abuse can flourish unchecked. In some cases, teens have suffered severe injuries or even died as a result of the harsh conditions and inadequate care. On top of all of that, the efficacy of these programs has been often called into question. While some kids may benefit from the structured environment and intensive therapy, others may be further traumatized by the experience. The industry has been accused of putting profit over the well-being of their participants, with some programs charging insanely high fees but delivering substandard care. In recent years, there's been a growing movement advocating for greater regulation and oversight of the troubled teen industry. Former participants, mental health professionals, and activists are calling for reforms to ensure that these programs are safe, effective, and truly therapeutic. The push for change includes demands for better staff training, stricter licensing requirements, and more comprehensive monitoring to prevent abuse and ensure the well-being of the adolescents in these programs. Eland School in Maine is one of the most notorious examples of abuse within the troubled teen industry. Founded in 1970, it operated until 2011 and was known for its harsh disciplinary methods. Former students have reported physical abuse, emotional torment, and humiliating punishments, such as being forced to wear signs detailing their supposed misdeeds or being subjected to prolonged isolation. Provo Canyon School in Utah gained widespread attention when Paris Hilton, a former student, spoke out about the abuse she endured there. She described being subjected to physical restraints, forced medication, and verbal abuse.
The last school that I went to was Provo Canyon School. And that was the worst of the worst. There's no getting out of there. You're sitting on a chair, staring at a wall all day long, getting yelled at or hit. I felt like a lot of the people who work there got off on torturing children and seeing them naked. They would prescribe everyone all these pills. I didn't know what they were giving me. I would just feel so tired and numb. Some people in that place were just gone. Like, the lights are on, no one's home. A lot of people were on suicide watch. And I was so scared that was going to happen to me. So eventually, I found out a way to not take the pills. But everyone would tell on everyone, and they found a Kleenex with all of the pills in it. And I got in so much trouble for that.
The staff verbally abused me, calling me vulgar names that should never be said to a child. CEDU forced us to participate in attack therapy designed to humiliate and degrade you. I did not comply with the program, so I was brought to Ascent in Idaho. At Ascent, I was forced to do physical labor while malnourished and sleep deprived. I couldn't speak to my parents because the staff said I didn't deserve to. One day, a staff member strangled me and slapped me across the face in front of the other kids. She did this to instill fear in everyone. Despite hypothermia and physical beatings from staff, there was no medical care. Next, I was sent to Cascade. I received no education or therapy there. I feared daily for my well-being, but I would not let them break my spirit. Provo Canyon School was my final stop. I was given clothes with the number on the tag. I was no longer Paris. I was only number 127. I was verbally, mentally, and physically abused on a daily basis. I was cut off from the outside world and stripped of all of my human rights. I was not allowed to be myself, hold my own opinions, or even speak. Without a diagnosis, I was forced to consume medication that made me feel numb and exhausted. I didn't breathe fresh air or see the sunlight for 11 months. There was zero privacy. Every time I would use the bathroom or take a shower, it was monitored. At 16 years old, as a child, I felt their piercing eyes staring at my naked body. I was just a kid and felt violated every single day.
The Catherine Freer Wilderness Therapy Program in Oregon faced multiple scandals as well, including accusations of abuse and neglect. In 2002, a 15-year-old boy named Aaron Bacon died there while attending one of their wilderness programs. An investigation revealed Aaron had been denied adequate food, water, and medical care, leading to severe malnutrition and dehydration. The list of these facilities and their shortcomings goes on, and now Trails Carolina joins that list. Trails Carolina is a for-profit camp for troubled teens that charges up to $715 a day, and there's a $4,900 fee for enrollment. Their website has since been taken down, but using the Wayback Machine, I was able to see what it looked like before it was removed. The website says that a typical length of stay is 85 days, and this is going to be determined by the patient's progress. The homepage announces that Trails Carolina, quote, helps families reconnect, heal, and thrive. And these words are accompanied by a photo slideshow of wholesome, healthy-looking teenagers meditating in peaceful-looking environments, adults and kids working together to solve something or build something, and generally, Trails Carolina looks like, from these photos, a nice and relaxing place that any one of us might benefit from retreating to for a week or two. Quote, at Trails Carolina, our wilderness therapies program's mission is to give your child the confidence, coping mechanisms, and communication skills that will help them become the best version of themselves. Throughout our wilderness program, families restore and rebuild their relationship with their child. We believe that by connecting with nature in a wilderness therapy setting, your child can learn to address their unhealthy behaviors, gain valuable personal insights, and learn important lessons. Free from the distractions and negative influences of everyday life, they can focus on their own personal growth and healing process. Our multidisciplinary team of caring expert staff will be there to guide your child along their unique path to psychological and emotional wellness. This journey can lead to a renewed sense of self and a happier, healthier future brimming with opportunity. End quote. The program is intended for children aged 10 through 17 who have been diagnosed with things like major depressive disorder, ADHD, PTSD, parent-child relational problems, generalized anxiety disorder, autism spectrum disorder, disruptive mood disorder, and more. They offer individualized treatment plans, a school with accredited academics, psychological testing, an equine program, and they employ master's-level therapists. Trails Carolina claims that 90% of their students show improvement in extremely significant symptoms of anxiety and depression 12 months after graduation. And there are, to be fair, actually some positive testimonials on the website that back this up, parents and children who say that Trails Carolina helped them. But this is going to bring us to February 2nd, 2024, when 12-year-old Clark Harmon, who was suffering from ADHD and anxiety, arrived to Trails Carolina. Now, according to his father, Clark was slightly underdeveloped. He was having issues making friends his own age, and he would sometimes get physical with his parents and siblings. Apparently, this issue had become disruptive enough for Clark's parents to believe that he needed more extensive help, and they chose Trails Carolina as the destination where their son could receive that help. Reportedly, Clark was removed from his New York home by two men who he had never met before, two strange men who transported him to North Carolina, where he was admitted to the camp on the afternoon of February 2nd. Camp staff said that Clark had arrived and been loud and irate earlier in the day, but after that point, he became cooperative and interactive, although he refused to eat dinner that evening. He was assigned to cabin 6 with 4 other juvenile clients, and that night everyone went to bed. But the next morning, when the facility staff attempted to wake Clark up, he was unresponsive, and they called local law enforcement. When first responders arrived to cabin 6, they found Clark lying face up in a CPR mask on the floor of the cabin. His knees were bent, his arms were on his chest, and his body was cold to the touch. Detectives also noticed discoloration of Clark's skin and possible bruising near his eyes. He was wearing a red hoodie and a t-shirt, but his pants and underwear were found next to his shoulder. And camp staff informed the police that they did not know why Clark was not wearing his pants or underwear. Another strange detail about the scene that first responders walked into was that it appeared Clark had been put to sleep the night before in something called a bivvy bag.
Bivvy sack, also known as bivouac sack, these were invented to serve climbers who wanted and needed ultra-light emergency protection for their sleep systems when they were out for an ascent. Originally, bivvy sacks were nothing more than a nylon shell that was essentially waterproof, but it really offered nothing more than that. It was quick protection from a quick rain or snow event that allowed you to essentially make camp anywhere, in places that you couldn't even imagine doing so, that were impossible with a tent. Since their creation, bivvies have evolved. The technology has changed, and people are using them for all sorts of reasons, including military forces all around the world. Think of a bivvy as a single-walled tent, because that is what they are.
So basically, from what I can tell, a bivvy bag or a bivvy sack is a sleeping bag with like an additional layer of protection from bugs and the elements in the form of some external or extra enclosures. Now, the bivvy sack that Clark Harmon was found in had a zippered mesh cover, which would protect from bugs, and then over that, like a waterproof nylon cover that would protect you from the rain or the snow, or at least that's what it's intended to do. Now, you might ask why Clark Harmon was put to sleep in this contraption when he, in fact, was not sleeping outside in the elements, but on the floor of Cabin 6 at the Trails Carolina Wilderness Camp, and we are going to talk about that. But if you do a quick Google search, take a stroll around the internet, you'll find that many experienced outdoorsmen will continuously caution against ever zipping your bivvy bag fully, because of the danger of suffocating while inside. Now, from the start, the staff and administration at Trails Carolina was not super cooperative, at least according to the Transylvania County Sheriff's Department. Police on the scene requested to speak to the other juvenile clients who'd been in the cabin at the time of Clark's death, but, quote, Trails Carolina staff refused to allow us to speak to any juveniles on site as well as see them. They also refused to give out any of the juveniles' names or dates of births or any other information as well. End quote. Following the incident, Clark was transported to Winston-Salem for an autopsy, and according to the police report, this was done because his death seems suspicious, given that he had just arrived at the facility less than 24 hours prior. The medical examiner performed Clark's autopsy on February 6th, and a preliminary report determined that Clark's death appeared to not be due to natural causes, but the manner and cause of death were still pending. That same day, February 6th, law enforcement searched Cabin 6, and deputies claimed that the camp was once again not being cooperative with their investigation, adding that the 4 staff members who'd been present that night of Clark's death had been placed on leave. Trails Carolina responded to this information coming out of the Sheriff's Department very defensively, with a spokesperson from the camp stating that their staff had voluntarily participated in interviews with police, and they were fully cooperating, saying, quote, any assertion to the contrary is false, reckless, and defamatory, end quote.
The boy died at Trails Carolina Camp last Friday. That's in Lake Toxaway. The sheriff says he was dropped off at the camp less than 24 hours earlier. According to the sheriff, the boy died in a cabin he shared with other minors and 4 staffers. The sheriff says an autopsy revealed the boy's death was not from natural causes, but the cause of death is still pending. The sheriff accused the camp of, quote, not fully cooperating. Trails Carolina Camp denied the sheriff's accusations, saying in part the family and their son deserve nothing less than a thorough, professional, fact-based investigation by law enforcement, other government agencies, and our program. Speculation before the full results of these investigations are available is harmful.
As far as allowing law enforcement to speak to the other campers/clients, Trails Carolina stated, quote, no other students were involved in any way, and all students were moved immediately so as to minimize the impact on them. Our students have cooperated to the extent authorized by their parents. Trails has conducted an internal investigation of this incident, and the Trails facility has been investigated by outside professionals who are subject matter experts. Both investigations have concluded that there's no evidence that Trails failed to properly supervise, no evidence that Trails caused harm, and no evidence that conditions at Trails were unsafe or unhealthy, end quote. Remember that. 2 investigations were completed by February 8th, which is when the statement came out, less than a week after this 12-year-old boy died on the floor of one of their cabins. They did an internal investigation, and then they had an outside agency of subject matter experts do an additional investigation, and both these investigations showed that Trails Carolina was not at fault in any way, shape, or form. Conveniently enough, the camp would not respond when asked who the outside professionals were that conducted the second investigation, and they did not provide reports of said investigation, either of them, not the internal one or the external one. The statement continued to say, quote, Trails has not been made aware of any suspicious preliminary findings by the medical examiner. Conversations with detectives and public agency personnel, interviews with staff, and preliminary reports indicate that this was an accidental death, end quote, which is funny because the sheriff's office said that the autopsy results found that the death wasn't natural. And I always think it's suspicious when someone tries to get ahead of the narrative in the process of a criminal investigation and announce that nothing suspicious is going on long before law enforcement has even scratched the surface of a case. For instance, J.P. Miller. He also did this when his wife Micah Miller died. The public information officer with the Transylvania Sheriff's Office, John Nicholson, told the media that the department stood by its initial news release, stating, quote, they cooperated a little bit, but not completely. That's why we had to get the 2 warrants to get the information we needed, end quote. Now, Trails Carolina happens to be one of the 2 residential therapy camps in North Carolina who are certified by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. The NCDHHS, North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, stated in a press release that they had been notified by Trails Carolina of the death of a client on February 3rd. And since then, they'd been at the site, the camp, for several days, working closely with local authorities and investigating the incident. They also stated that before February of 2024, the last time they'd been at the camp was June 12th of 2023. And this is accurate because these records are public, and we can see that the Department of Health and Human Services was at Trails Carolina on June 12th, 2023. And before that, they hadn't been there for 2 years. We also have a statement of deficiency from June 12th, which means while the department was there, they found some issues with Trails Carolina. So basically, in reports like this, it's going to tell you what these facilities need to do in order to be up to code, in order to be certified by the state, and in what areas they have not met those expectations. The June 12th survey consisted of 8 current clients and 7 former clients, and the first deficiency noted was the lack of training in some staff members. For example, the report says that prior to providing services to people with disabilities, staff members should complete specific training, and each year the staff continues to be employed by the facility, they should complete a refresher training. The report concluded that the facility had failed to ensure training on alternatives to restrictive interventions. Now, what are restrictive interventions? Basically, exactly what it sounds like. They're methods used, interventions used to deal with clients, juveniles in this case, who may be difficult. And these methods are restrictive, such as seclusion, physical restraint, isolation, timeout, protective devices. Some statements from current and former clients included details such as campers trying to run away and being chased by the staff, put into an arm lock or thrown on the ground. One client said, quote, "I went out of camp boundaries. I wanted space and didn't want people watching me." And this juvenile demonstrated how the staff forced them to sit down on the ground with hands on both of their forearms. Many of the statements included the client trying to get some space or privacy and being tracked down by camp staff and brought back rather aggressively. Incidences from March and June revealed clients were physically restrained by staff for up to 15 minutes. Reportedly, the Trails staff had been trained in a program called the AEGIS System, Crisis Prevention and De-Escalation, which is a nationally recognized crisis intervention training provider focused on mental and behavioral health care. Now, the AEGIS website says that participants are going to learn to manage their own stress levels to mitigate the chance of overreacting or underreacting during a crisis intervention. This stress inoculation will enable professionals to maintain safety-oriented thinking while under duress. Participants will also learn about the important role that nonverbal communication has in a crisis intervention. They will learn how to present themselves to an escalated person and maintain a non-threatening presentation. Professionals will learn to evade and escape unwanted contact using techniques that are appropriate for clinical environments. For organizations using benevolent restraint, participants will learn to use AEGIS holds, which are arranged in a tertiary design, maintaining the least restrictive option to ensure a safe outcome. So apparently, Trails Carolina wasn't doing this. They were being a little bit more rough with their holds. And Trails Carolina responded that their use of the AEGIS training program, quote, eliminates the need for dangerous prone and supine floor restraints, end quote, which clearly means that at some point they were using some restraints on their clients. Now, there were also past issues at Trails Carolina with medication disposal, with some clients receiving expired medication. One client received expired melatonin and expired fiber capsules for almost a full month. The fiber had expired in August of 2019. The melatonin had expired in October of 2020. And the juvenile client received these two medications from 5/27/21 through 6/16/21. In 2021, there were also issues with patients' rights at 24-hour facilities, specifically the right to contact the outside world through letters, emails, phone calls, etc. And the report said, quote, the facility failed to ensure clients could communicate and consult with their parents, guardian, agency, or individual having legal custody, affecting 6 of 7 audited clients, end quote. Clients at Trails Carolina stated that they were denied requests to call their parents, and keep in mind, the kids who are telling their stories about their time at this camp have some pretty heavy diagnoses. Major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, the works. They're very young, being pulled away from their homes, their lives, their friends, their families, thrown into a camp with a bunch of strangers. And most of the time, this is against their will. They didn't ask for this. They didn't want this. They had some goons come and take them in the middle of the night and bring them to this camp. To deny these kids some comfort or contact from home seems cruel and unusual, especially as they transition and settle into their new normal. Trails Carolina and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services have had their issues for years, and this time it would be no different. On February 16, 2024, the department released a statement accusing the camp of denying the Department of Social Services access to the remaining clients for days. In a February 12th letter to the Trails Carolina executive director, the department said that social workers were at the camp on February 4th, the day after Clark was found dead, but they were prevented access to the remaining campers until February 6th. Camp spokesperson Wendy D'Alessandro denied that their staff did anything wrong by preventing access to the campers, and she said because the kids' parents needed to be contacted first. D'Alessandro said, quote, so they never blocked access to the kids. One of the things that was going on was for any of the children to speak with law enforcement or state agencies, they had to ask the parents' permission. They're required by law to do that, and the parents said no, end quote. Wendy also said the children had been moved away from the scene to protect them, to protect their mental health, not to keep them away from law enforcement. On February 16th, the Department of Health and Human Services, in their statement, said that they had not only instructed Trails Carolina to not admit any new patients, but all remaining patients needed to be removed from the facility. And once again, Trails Carolina responded defensively and aggressively, I might add. They said, quote, after 5 p.m. on February 15th, DHHS threatened and intimidated parents by demanding parents travel from all over the country to pick up their children, or DHHS would take the children into custody. The children were receiving high-level clinical care for complex mental health diagnoses requiring experienced professionals with full knowledge of critical medications and specialized treatment regimens. Normally, Locating alternate programs and matching children for placement takes several weeks. This negligent and reckless move by the state denied parents the opportunity to continue to care for their children in the appropriate manner. 100% of parents did not want their children to leave the program. The impact of the state's reckless actions is far-reaching. The 18 vulnerable children forced to leave a safe healing space against their parents' wishes have suffered permanent, serious, and unnecessary harm. There are limited places where parents can turn to find the necessary care for severe mental health diagnoses and complex treatment. This is a tragic and unnecessary loss for parents, children, and 75-plus staff members who have poured their heart and soul into helping the kids. The sheriff and DHHS likely did not have the evidence to close the program and take its license through appropriate and generally accepted judicial review. Calling and intimidating parents to pick up their children was an attempt to achieve their nefarious goal while avoiding fair and appropriate due process with full factual disclosures, end quote. Big words coming from Trails Carolina, strong sentiments. I do have an issue with the camp saying the police threatened parents to pick up their own children. These parents may want to place their children in another facility like this, but why can't they take custody of their own children during the time it takes to research and enroll them in another program? Aren't they the parents? It's like Trails Carolina was like, oh, the Department of Health and Human Services has denied parents the ability to care for their children. Well, the parents weren't caring for their children. The camp was caring for their children. The parents had basically signed their children over to these camps. And now, when there's an actual death and a police investigation and the parents have to come and get their kids, the parents in Trails Carolina are like, this is ludicrous. This is horrible. How can you do this? They're your kids. They're your kids. And honestly, the fact that a camper died in the care of Trails Carolina, you should want to take your kids out until they know exactly what happened. The fact that you wanted to leave your kids there, 100% of parents wanted their children to remain there, that's concerning. That's concerning. Once the news of the death of a child at Trails Carolina began spreading, former clients and employees began to emerge with their own horror stories of the therapy camp, and the media dug up an older news story showing that Clark Harmon was not the first death at the wilderness camp. 17-year-old Alec Lansing had been a client with Trails Carolina when he tried to escape the camp during a hiking trip on November 10, 2014. Trails Carolina later reported that Alec had ventured off on his own at around 2:30 p.m., but he was not reported missing until hours later at 6 p.m. Alex's body was found by authorities on November 22nd in a creek at the bottom of a gorge in a remote portion of the forest. His clothes had frozen to his body, he had a broken hip, and police at the scene noted evidence of removed tree moss from a tree which leaned over the small stream in which Alec was found. An investigation concluded that Alec had tried to scale the tree but had fallen into the stream, fracturing his hip and rendering him immobile. And a Department of Health and Human Services report stated that Trails Carolina staffers had subjected Alec to neglect and harm by not following supervision protocol.
For nearly a week, eyes in Jackson County have turned to the sky and to maps in the search for missing 17-year-old Alec Lansing.
2 years after Kathleen's time at Trails, 17-year-old Alec Lansing died when he ran away from his Trails group, climbed up a tree, fell into a creek, and broke his femur.
Alec Lansing died from injuries and exposure.
He was found dead 12 days later. The investigation report by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services shows Trails staff waited more than 5 hours before calling police to report the missing teen. And the sheriff's deputy involved in the search said they may have been able to find the teen had they been notified in time to send search crews the day he went missing. After DHHS's findings, Trails was given a $12,000 fine and cited for failing to supervise a student. Nothing else happened. In a statement, a DHHS spokeswoman said they found the improper supervision that led to Lansing dying was an isolated incident.
So they were fined $12,000, but allowed Trails Carolina to continue operating and taking in new clients. And can we just once again make note of the fact that Alec was trying to escape Trails Carolina at the time of his death, and that it took several hours for them to report him missing? Why would he be trying to escape if it was such a great place? I mean, maybe he just wanted to go home. Maybe he didn't want to be there, whatever. But he's not the only kid that's tried to escape, trust me. I mean, obviously, we know he's not because Trails Carolina has been accused of improperly, restraining and holding other kids who have tried to run away. Additionally, Fox News has uncovered 4 separate lawsuits against Trails Carolina dating back to 2010. 2 of them had been filed by parents of a child who had alleged sexual abuse at the hands of another camper, and the other 2 were filed by former employees who said they had witnessed physical abuse at the facility. Now, before I get into the specifics of these lawsuits and testimonials from others who claim to have suffered at the hands of Trails Carolina, I want to bring the conversation back to the Bivvy bag that Clark Hammond was found dead in. I want to talk about exactly what it was used for at the camp and the purpose that Trails Carolina claimed the Bivvy bag served in regards to its juvenile clients. So while a Bivvy bag has been described as a one-person tent, it's really not a tent at all. It's like a sleeping bag inside of another bag. And at Trails Carolina, the Bivvy was used as a restraint method for the young campers. It appears that Trails has used this method for a while, or other methods like it, variations of the Bivvy bag. And according to Trails Carolina staff, when new clients come in, they can be placed on something called assigned proximity supervision, or safety. Basically, it means that a staff member is always going to be within arm's reach of the client or the patient. And from what I can gather based on interviews with the staff, most of the kids coming into Trails Carolina were placed on safety their first night. And when a camper is placed on safety, one of the 3 automatic requirements is increased sleeping precaution, and the Bivvy bag is the default option for that. Now, I assume the kids who are having a hard time adjusting, who aren't being as cooperative as the staff would like them to be, who may be at risk for running away, they're the ones placed on safety and forced to sleep in this fabric coffin. First, the child will be placed inside the Bivvy bag, which sits inside of a plastic sheet that gets wrapped around the Bivvy bag with the child inside. Then an alarm is placed on the zipper of the bag. That way, if the child tries to unzip the bag and get out, staff will be notified. When that is all set up and the kid is thoroughly trapped inside a claustrophobia hell, a staff member of the same sex will sleep head-to-head with the juvenile student, always within arm's reach. Additionally, there's supposed to be 1 staff member each night who's responsible for night checks. So this staff member would wake up at certain times throughout the night and check to make sure that each camper was in their bunk or Bivvy bag, that everyone was alive and well. So now we're going to talk about previous clients and employees' experience with Trails Carolina. And some of these, by the way, did not come out after Clark's death. The media has been reporting about the issues at Trails for years. The claims are consistent. Goons come in the middle of the night and take these kids away from their homes, their families, their parents, and then they're brought to the middle of nowhere. They are strip searched. They are processed and then put into a cabin that, although their parents are paying an arm and a leg for, the conditions are subpar. The food quality is bad. Clients weren't allowed to shower often. They were not allowed to contact their family members. They were not allowed any privacy. They were not allowed to keep any personal possessions, not even their clothes, because they're given a uniform at the time of arrival. On top of that, although Trails promises this incredibly therapeutic and mentally health-focused environment, most of the time at the facility, clients were under the supervision of non-trained staff members who were making minimum wage, who had no idea how to handle juveniles with complicated mental health issues. And there are many claims of physical and sexual abuse. In an article from 2021, Kathleen Riley tells her story. She said she was 16 years old in July of 2012 when she woke up to her father telling her that there were people there who were going to take her. When Kathleen went to grab her phone off the nightstand, she found it was gone. Suddenly, a man and a woman dressed in uniforms entered her room and started swearing at her, telling her to get up. Kathleen recalled the moment, saying, quote, "Then he said we can do this the easy way or the hard way." And he had restraints, and he said the police have been notified that you're a danger to yourself and others. If you run, I will tackle you. Your flight leaves in 2 hours, end quote.
Harmed all of us, our whole family.
Heidi Riley is Kathleen's mom.
When you made the decision to send Kathleen to Trails, what did you think you were doing?
We thought we were helping her get some therapeutic help.
In a recent letter to North Carolina state senators, a lawyer for Trails Carolina confirmed participants only receive 1 to 2 hours of individual therapy a week and 2 hours of group therapy a month.
So you sent your daughter to get therapy.
Yes.
Is that what she got?
To get help for, yeah. No, I don't think she got that. I think she was emotionally abused. It's tough because that decision, yeah, that's a tough one to live with, definitely.
I remember making every night, praying to a God I don't even believe in, saying, if you get me out of here, I promise I will do whatever I can to help whatever child so they don't have to go through this.
What are the long-lasting effects from your time at Trails?
I have severe sleep issues. I have a lot of abandonment issues, a lot of anxiety, panic disorder. It's not normal. It's not humane, and it's just not what it does to your brain. You still don't even want to admit to it. It's just like it's still there, and they have that power over you.
So you spend most of the time in the woods.
Yes.
With people who aren't trained therapists.
No.
But who are
Yes.
but who are deciding what you're doing every day.
Mm-hmm.
And they call that therapy?
Yeah, part of the process, part of the program.
What would you call it?
Abuse. We went once without 17 days without showering. Yeah, we were denied basic hygiene all the time. That was, again, and I thought, oh, it's just part of the process, yeah. I mean, we're in the woods.
Rebecca Burney, who is now 21, was sent to Trails, Carolina the day after her 14th birthday in 2016. Obviously, Rebecca felt betrayed and abandoned by her parents, and she said, quote, "I know if I had died on my first night, I would have died believing I was unloved and unwanted." End quote. After arriving, she was denied contact with her family for 3 days, and when she was finally given a letter from her parents explaining why they had made the decision to send her to the camp, she was told she had to read it out loud in front of all of her new bunkmates. Rebecca said, quote, "It's basically a letter telling you everything you've done wrong and putting all the blame on you. It's the first time you're reading it, and the staff will tell you that you have to read it word for word." End quote. A week and a half after arriving, Rebecca got her period for the first time, and she was only allowed to send a 40-second voice message to her mother. But the staff told Rebecca that they would only give her this option if she also apologized to her family for her past behavior. Caroline Savar's parents paid to have her transported to Trails, Carolina by two strangers in the middle of the night in 2013 when she was 14 years old. She said her first night there, she was in shock. She never cried so hard in her life. Each of these previous campers gives the same sequence of events. Their stay began with a strip search by a staff member, in some cases with no underwear. Then they were handed a set of hiking clothes, brought to their assigned cabin. Former client Lily said, quote, "The first thing I noticed was the smell. Just a putrid mix of urine and BO. It was the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life. And then this little 10-year-old girl in my group comes up to me, looks at me, and goes, 'Wow, you're so clean.' I just remember thinking, where the hell am I? What on earth is this?" End quote. Lily said that she would soon learn that the smell was due to the lack of showering, but also because bathroom breaks were limited during hiking trips. Many of the kids would wet themselves, and since they only showered at the most once a week, the smell was strong. Overall, the conditions at Trails, Carolina seem to not be the greatest or most hygienic.
And other kids who've been to Trails Carolina say they got ringworm, they were starved, they were only allowed to shower once a week. One kid who arrived said the place smelled so bad, and they were forced to walk around for hours on end and hike through the woods. I mean, is that an accurate depiction of what conditions were like?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, the week before I had gotten there, my group had ringworms. When we couldn't start a fire, we wouldn't have dinner because we couldn't cook. So we'd have like cold soaked food occasionally, or we would just not eat. And then showers were extremely limited. I would say I had probably 2 showers a month for the 3 months that I was there.
Zoe Aridas, who went to Trails, Carolina in 2019, said that the staff would only let her talk to her parents through letters, and if there was something in those letters that the camp didn't want the parents to see, they would take it out. Mail coming into the camp was also opened and inspected before being handed over to its intended recipient. According to a former staff member, some of the campers even posed threats to the other campers, and often the staff didn't know how to handle bad situations when they would come up. This person asked to remain anonymous due to fear of retaliation, but they said, quote, "When you go to the website and it shows kids fishing, that's a false advertisement. These kids aren't fishing because you're afraid they're going to use the pole as a weapon and kill someone. You see kids riding in a canoe, that's false advertisement. Those kids aren't riding in canoes because they may go out on the lake and try to kill themselves. Those kids aren't rappelling or going on mountain hikes because you're afraid they're going to push someone off the cliff." End quote.
The people that spend the majority of the time with them are not trained therapists.
Jonathan Hyde worked at Trails for 6 weeks last summer. He was paid minimum wage as a guide.
I had kids that were vocally suicidal. I had kids that tried running away. I had kids that would try and fight you.
With nearly a dozen teens and just 3 staff members, Hyde says adequate supervision was often hard.
Plenty of times where we both had to, 2 out of, the 3 staff had to go focus on one individual. The question of supervision there, effective supervision comes into question.
Hyde says he got just 3 days of training.
If I was a parent, I'd be pretty pissed to find out what the actual therapy that happens. It does happen, it's on a scheduled basis, but the time that they actually meet with a licensed therapist is very minimal.
In a recent letter to North Carolina state senators, a lawyer for Trails Carolina confirmed participants only receive 1 to 2 hours of individual therapy a week and 2 hours of group therapy a month.
Now, this staff member only worked at Trails for less than a year, and they said that although there are trained and qualified staff on hand, students mostly interacted with counselors who had little or no mental health training, and this person was not surprised to hear about the death of Clark Harmon, saying, quote, "There's some really troubled teens that would say they couldn't wait to kill a new student, and they treated it like a sick game. And when you mix certain students together and don't know how to deal with them, it's a lethal combination," end quote. Now let's talk about 2 former Trails Carolina clients who had filed lawsuits against the facility. Clara Mann was sent to Trails from October 23, 2019 to November 23, 2019 when she was 14 years old. Clara said she would hike several miles a day with 50-pound backpacks, drinking muddy water from streams and eating meals that consisted of peanut butter on tortillas and or cold-soaked oats. But that was not the worst of her experiences. That was child's play compared to what happened to her at night. Court paperwork says, quote, "Shortly after arriving at Trails Carolina, plaintiff was assigned to sleep in a yurt alongside other campers and camp staff. Having not even adjusted to the stress of an unfamiliar situation, an older camper with a prior history of sexual assault that was known or should have been known to Trails Carolina put hands in plaintiff's underwear and digitally penetrated her vagina while plaintiff was unconscious. Plaintiff awoke during this molestation, causing severe emotional distress. Plaintiff thereafter spoke to Trails Carolina staff and requested to be separated from the girl secondary to the sexual assault. Indefensibly, Trails Carolina denied plaintiff's request to be separated from her assailant. Several nights later, the assailant sexually battered plaintiff again, attempting to forcibly penetrate plaintiff after Trails Carolina required plaintiff to sleep in the same position. Following the second assault, plaintiff's pleas to Trails Carolina counselors were ignored, and Trails Carolina continued to house plaintiff in immediate proximity to her assailant. On or about November 12, 2019, plaintiff sent a letter to her father, Dr. James Mann, alluding to the sexual assault and indicating she wants the police involved. After receiving the letter, Dr. Mann called Trails Carolina to express his concern. The Trails Carolina counselor who accepted Dr. Mann's call ensured that Trails Carolina would promptly investigate the allegation. However, during this investigation, plaintiff continued to be forced to spend nights alongside her assailant. Finally, on or about November 19, 2019, plaintiff's main therapist, Trails Carolina member Shailene Pierce, asked plaintiff the specifics of her allegations against her assailant. Plaintiff told Pierce the identity of her assailant and the details of the assaults she had suffered. Trails Carolina forced plaintiff to spend yet another day and night with her assailant before it finally placed that student in isolation. End quote. Clara Mann and her attorneys claim that this incident was never reported to law enforcement and that Trails deceptively withheld the abuse from public authorities, failing at all times to report the crime despite their legal obligation to do so. The lawsuit also claims, quote, Trails Carolina conditions its students to adhere to the practice of strict obedience of its employees and encourages an environment of breaking down its students, creating an environment of fear and silence which pedophiles crave and can exploit. And Trails Carolina promotes the ideas of strict compliance and not rocking the boat, all of which help facilitate a pedophile's efforts to keep the victims silent and compliant. End quote.
When your incident happened, was that individual removed from the group?
After some time.
But it took other incidents before that happened?
It did. It took some time, yeah.
I asked a trauma-specialized mental health professional about North Carolina's law, which requires all adults report suspected child maltreatment.
And even in that context, you don't have to have proof. You really just need to have enough just cause to say, I believe this child is being maltreated. And at that point, making the call to the Department of Social Services or Child Protective Services.
Civil complaints claim Trails deceptively withheld the abuse despite obligations to report it. Trails Carolina denied claims.
My dad took what I said very seriously, and he did the right thing. He removed me from the program. So in a lot of ways, I've had it a lot easier than most people who went to Trails or just went into the troubled teen industry.
Gertie Siegel thought she was just going to Trails Carolina for 1 week when she was 12 years old and battling depression, but she ended up staying there for 3 months in 2016, 3 months that were the worst of her life. Gertie claims that she only spent about an hour a week with her therapist, and the rest of the time she was hiking, not eating enough food, and sometimes drinking water from broken water filters. Her first week at camp, one of Gertie's friends was sexually assaulted by another juvenile client, but the perpetrator was not separated from the rest of the girls and later went on to assault someone else. Even though staffers knew of the issue with this specific client, they forced Gertie to sleep next to her anyways, and then Gertie herself became a victim. When Gertie told her therapist what had happened, she claims the therapist told her that she was equally at fault and made Gertie take accountability for not verbally saying no. According to the lawsuit, this incident was also never reported to law enforcement or state officials.
Gertie was 12 when her parents hired transporters to take her thousands of miles from home in May of 2016.
The only thing that really made it worth it was that they truly believed I was receiving help for my depression and that it was the only option that they had left.
And in reality?
In reality, I was not being fed enough. I was not showering enough. I was in unsafe conditions. I was harmed by another student. I was gaslit by my therapist. I was not allowed to call my parents at all for the 3 months I was there. My letters to my parents were monitored and censored. I was not safe.
She says her group got pinworm infections when broken water filters weren't replaced. Gertie's cat, Kitty, now provides her with solace.
She tries to snuggle with me when I'm crying. She's the best. I love her.
Comfort when the weight of memories from when she said she was sexually assaulted by a girl during her time at Trails Carolina resurfaces.
Was anything done?
No. They didn't report it to the authorities. I disclosed to my therapist the morning after it happened. She told me that I was at equal fault as the kid who assaulted me.
How are you doing today?
I struggle. I'm getting there. I'm trying. I'm in therapy. I meet with a trauma specialist. She's nice. She takes me seriously when I talk about what happened, which is important because so much of what I went through was not taken seriously.
NBC News did interviews with 14 individuals who had attended the camp between 2013 and 2022, and 7 of these people said that on their first night, the staff forced them to sleep in what they called a burrito, which was basically just a tarp folded over their sleeping bag and tucked in, restricting their ability to move. A staff member would sleep next to them on a tarp so that they would wake up if the client tried to escape their burrito. 23-year-old Alex Rutter, who was at Trails in 2017, said that she was placed in the burrito not only on her first night, but whenever she complained or disobeyed. She said, quote, "You couldn't sleep. You'd sit there and have panic attacks all night," end quote.
The warrants in the 12-year-old's death describe a restraint system using heavy plastic and a sleeping bivvy with an alarm. Both girls detailed similar experiences.
You would take a big tarp and lay it on the ground, and then you would take your sleeping bag and get inside of it on the end of the tarp, and then a staff member would roll you like a burrito and then leave just enough slack.
Clara said it was uncomfortable, claustrophobic, and then this happened.
I had a male staff member sleep head to head with me instead of sleeping head to foot, and he was rubbing me like this in my sleep, and he was cuddling my 14-year-old body.
What do you do at that point?
Nothing, because your arms and legs are like this. You can't get out.
It was also reported to staff, but Clara was told
to not talk about it.
A search warrant filed by criminal investigators described how the boy had to sleep that night in a bivvy bag strung up on a thick piece of plastic with an alarm that would go off if he moved. It's a slightly different version of a contraption Mitterando and other former campers have described having to sleep in themselves, called a burrito.
You read maybe the details of the contraption that that they said he was sleeping in, did it sound like the burrito to you?
Yeah, the restrictive component of it was the same, yeah. I remember I was on burrito for 2 weeks, and I remember not being able to sleep because I could not move. I could not breathe very well. It was just kind of like a cocoon.
What's going through your mind as you're laying in this contraption?
A lot of it is like, what did I do to deserve this?
We would lay on a tarp, and then they'd wrap it over us, restraining us from any movement.
So you can't move?
Mm-mm. I'm like, you had to stay like this the whole time.
For the whole night?
Mm-hmm.
And as you're laying there, that can't be comfortable.
Mm-mm.
What's going through your mind?
Well, at that point for me, I just didn't understand by the people that were my role models in my life, like my parents. I just didn't understand, why would any parent send their kid here?
This 14-year-old girl, whose parents asked we not use her name, went to Trails, Carolina in 2022.
When I heard about the death at Trails, it hurt me a lot more than I thought it would, because my first reaction was I made it out, but he didn't.
Trails Carolina spokesperson Wendy D'Alessandro has claimed in a statement that the camp has discontinued the use of the burrito since last year, although it was still used as a backup until recently. Trails now uses the Bivvy bags to, quote, support the psychological and emotional well-being of the children, end quote. I don't know what kind of support these burritos or Bivvy bags are giving, because I would lose my mind. I'm claustrophobic. I hate being constrained. I can't sleep. I can't even use a weighted blanket. Some people like weighted blankets. I feel like I'm suffocating. I feel like something's pressing down on me and I panic. I do not understand how these burritos, these Bivvy bags, were supposed to make things better for these children who were allegedly dealing with issues that were psychological and mental and emotional. It just, especially to be forced to sleep like that, if you like it and you like being restrained, then you can request it, but to be forced to sleep like that, it's very hard to understand what kind of scientific basis there is for this. And I did look into it. There are certain therapies or certain therapeutic methods where they do instruct parents and caregivers to it's called the holding method, where you just basically squeeze the child, and this is supposed to do something good for them. And once again, there's not a lot of scientific evidence that it's productive in any way, shape, or form. Unsilenced is a not-for-profit organization that serves past, present, and future victims of institutional child abuse. It claims that one of the biggest culprits of this abuse is the troubled teen industry, which claims to reform youth struggling with mental health or educational challenges. Unsilenced asserts that instead of providing therapeutic services and education to at-risk youth, many young people experience maltreatment, psychological harm, sexual and bodily assault, physical and medical neglect, civil rights violations, and in some cases, hospitalization or even death. On their website, they have a testimonial from an anonymous past Trails Carolina camper. And this person says, quote, I was sent to Trails Carolina for, and I quote, lying about completing homework. Trails Carolina advertises itself as a last resort for parents worried about the safety of their children, and as such, is a place for primarily suicidal, aggressive, or otherwise troubled minors. I had never been admitted to a hospital despite having clinical depression and have never been suicidal. Somehow, even though the Trails administration reviews every applicant, I was admitted to go. My parents tricked me into going to Trails by saying I needed to help them go get a car for my younger sister who was about to learn how to drive. At the time, I was 17 with my 18th birthday on March 18th, and I already had a license. I agreed to help them and suddenly found myself being dropped off in the middle of nowhere. The fact alone that parents can abandon their children in the woods with complete strangers and no access to their children other than through filtered letters is in itself shocking. Some of the borderline abusive practices I endured go as follows. Bathroom breaks. Using the bathroom was restricted to an unreasonable point, and residents could only use the bathroom when the bathroom tent was set up. We had to drink lots of water due to our regular hikes, and physical activity means you have to use the bathroom more often. This didn't seem to matter, and unless you used your 1 per week bathroom excuse, you were not allowed to use it outside of designated times. This resulted in people having accidents and counselors making them wear the same clothing despite how unhygienic that is. One shamed a girl in my group for being unable to hold her bladder after being refused a trip to the toilet. We were also timed and we were yelled at if we took over 2 minutes to use the toilet, even if one was having digestive issues. Medical negligence. Some of the absolute disregard for health was astounding. I have a lot of food intolerances that were refused to be met, and because of this, I physically couldn't keep down most meals. During my time at Trails, I went from 145 pounds to 120, and I wasn't overweight when I arrived. If you were unable to finish your meal, your group was given a punishment. If you threw up your meal, you were given no other food. This was an obvious problem for me, and it was severely neglected. I am now struggling with potential thyroid issues and slowed metabolism after basically starving for 77 days. Other than this, one of my group mates got a rash that I claimed looked like poison ivy. Instead of looking into this, I was chastised for giving unnecessary medical advice, and she was left alone for several days. Finally, when they got a nurse, she confirmed it was poison ivy. By this time, it had spread, and if treated earlier, would have saved her a lot of discomfort. By far the worst thing I witnessed in this category was during a hike to a new campsite in the rain. It was muddy out, and one of the girls in my group slipped due to her backpack's weight, fell, and hit her head on a protruding rock. She lost consciousness and was out for a solid minute, and when she woke up, was forced to keep hiking. That week, she experienced memory loss and other telltale symptoms of a concussion. But there was no medical treatment, and it was likely not documented. One of the main points of Trails is to break down the residents to a point where they have nowhere to go but up, a point where they are quite literally forced to try. This to me is wildly unethical, and we would face public humiliation, group punishments, verbal abuse, and constant stress. One of Trails' practices is reading a letter detailing why your parents have sent you. You're required to read it in front of your group the first day you meet them. These letters contain detailed trauma and personal experience that you are forced to share to people you have met a maximum of a few hours earlier. If you refuse to read it or leave out anything, the counselors will read it instead and then ask the group if they have feedback on your letter. Even ignoring the fact that being abandoned in the woods for several months is traumatic enough, actively having your prison guards break you down is morally unethical. These are just a few things that came to my mind and is not remotely a comprehensive list. I'm still dealing with trauma from Trails, including nightmares and flashbacks. Because of my time there, I have been on PTSD medication and am having to take trauma therapy, something I've never had to deal with before." End quote. I read this testimonial because it leads to my next point before we wrap up part 1 of this case. I think it goes without saying that the facilities who make a large profit by offering help to desperate parents and then treat their juvenile clients in this way, they're bad, objectively, right? And they honestly have no business being open. It feels very antiquated, very out of touch with what troubled kids and teens actually need. And my question to you is, have these residential troubled teen programs become the asylums of today? And how much responsibility do parents have to take when choosing to send their children to places like this, essentially abandoning them or dumping them into the care of complete strangers? I just did a strange and unusual video on Letchworth Village, an asylum that operated in the early 1900s until it was shut down for neglectful and abusive practices in the 60s. And we know that back in the day when kids were born with mental or physical disabilities, or they were simply unwanted or unable to be cared for, their parents would drop them off at these asylums. Is that what's happening now with the troubled teen industry? We have to assume that many of these parents have means, as they're able to afford the tuition for a place like Trails, Carolina. So why can't they provide therapy and support for their children in the comfort and safety of their own homes? Why would anyone think that shucking their child off into the care of a bunch of strangers, no matter how compassionate, would lessen mental or psychological issues? Now, survey says a lot of these kids leave these programs worse off than when they entered.
Instead of providing therapeutic services and education, young people often experience life-altering maltreatment, including forced labor, inadequate education, psychological harm, sexual and physical assault, neglect, civil rights violations, hospitalizations, and even death. To date, there have been over 350 documented youth who have died at the hands of this industry. Unfortunately, even in the absence of overt abuse in facilities, the act of being institutionalized itself can be harmful because the youth live under a total institution where they lose autonomy. Their contact with the outside world is restricted. They're unable to advocate for themselves, report abuse, and are forbidden to freely leave the facility for months to years, completely isolated from their community and families. This antiquated tough love approach of being removed from the home goes against what we know now. Youth with strong and cohesive relationships with family continue to experience mental health benefits, including lower levels of depressive symptoms, until their late 30s. The research is clear. Forcing young people out of their communities, labeling them as the problem, and creating a residential melting pot of youth who are struggling and calling it treatment isn't working. It is actually causing harm. One study of youth with emotional and behavioral disorders illustrated how 60% of young people had a reduction of symptoms when treated within their communities, but only 11% had reductions of symptoms when treated in residential care. Many youth leaving TTI facilities grow up to struggle with trauma disorders, fractured familial relationships, and have difficulty obtaining further schooling or maximizing career opportunities due to their educational setbacks. Regardless of the name or location of facilities, many have patterns of rampant abuse, and the 120 to 200,000 children who attend them annually leave calling themselves survivors. At that rate, there is a high probability that someone you know has been to one. As more and more survivors emerge from this industry, they are beginning to speak out about their experiences. Unsilenced was founded by survivors and allies aiming to stop institutional child abuse in congregate care facilities. We envision a world where youth are free from institutionalization, and the voices of young people are respected in the development of their mental, emotional, and physical well-being.
And so that is where we're going to wrap up for today. Now in part 2, we're going to go back to the main reason why we're talking about Trails Carolina, and it is because of that 12-year-old boy who died in that bivvy bag. And we're going to go over the autopsy, and we're going to see what the medical examiner said about why he died. And we're also going to look specifically at the police reports and the interviews with staff who were present with Clark in the cabin that night and that morning when he was found dead. So stay tuned for that, but don't forget to like this video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. I'll see you very, very soon.
Straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood.